That's my pleasure. Thank you so much, Daria, for inviting me. I should just clarify, I'm never on leave. It's been 12 years since I've had anything like a holiday from the ABC. Instead, I'm dipping into long service leave in order to get on top of some writing commitments. But like many of you, writing is a an activity of the soul and not just the mind. The idea of sort of stringing together large blocks of time in order to think thoughts sequentially after one another, rather than just an hour here and an hour there, is I know you've all found is incredibly valuable. But this isn't a soul labor for me. This is joy speaking with you all. So thank you for being here. I should also just clarify from the beginning, I've got nothing to say about writing for the mainstream media. I don't think many people should be writing for the mainstream media, to be perfectly honest. I think the mainstream media, in terms of the way that it both regulates, disseminates, and constricts certain forms of writing, especially writing that's worthwhile, writing that's worth lingering with. I think the mainstream media does a terrible, terrible job. Because there's a kind of business model that it has. The mainstream media puts out information that it believes that people are already interested in. And usually the role of editors, people who look after subject areas the way that I do, what their job is supposed to be is to have a read on what the audience wants, and then to go out and commission people that they believe will give the audience, who already think they know what they want, an article that already tells them what they already knew to be the case. So it's this terrible model where we believe, editors over a particular subject area, believe that we know what the audience wants. And then we go out and we fish for the kind of author, the kind of content that we then can give to people as a product that will hopefully get more views onto our page, more interaction or engagement on our social media accounts or whatever. And if you just think about that for a second, it's a vicious cycle, isn't it? And by vicious, I mean it's full of vice, because it assumes that editors are necessarily the experts. It assumes that writers are there as resources for editors or for websites or for newspapers to draw upon. And essentially, we don't want your opinion. If we want your opinion, we'll give it to you. And so you often find, I don't know how many of you have had experience of writing for op-ed pages, but very, very often what you end up submitting to an editor ends up getting chopped up. If you've heard back from them at all, it ends up getting chopped up and squeezed into a format that more suits what they think is marketable, what they think can easily be promoted online. So again, I don't know how many of you have had this experience. A great many of the contributors that I've secured over the last 12 years that the Religion and Ethics website has been going, they've come to me out of desperation and frustration with the way that they're treated by editors on other sites and in other pages. So for me, none of this is overly good. And if you then throw into that mix the idea that most mainstream media, when it comes to religious voices in particular, are only interested in a handful of hot button issues. Again, I'm sure you've all found that most editors only want to hear from you if it's about, and then go down your list of 3 or 4 things, which means that for a broader audience, all they really know about Islam, about the Islamic tradition, about the structure and the substance of Islamic ethics, about the ongoing debate within Islam over certain deep, profound, substantive moral issues, or the debate between Islam and other philosophical or religious traditions. All they know about that are those op-eds that have been reduced down to topics involving extremism and terrorism and the treatment or role of women within Islamic structures of authority, and on and on and on it goes. So it means that this vast tradition gets reduced down into a handful of hot button issues, and experts who should be gotten to weigh in on profound issues involving us all are having their rich thoughts squeezed into these incredibly narrow confines. I don't know about you, but I find every aspect of that insulting. I find it intellectually insulting. I find it editorially insulting. And to be perfectly frank, I don't know why you'd want to write for that kind of morally debauched and bankrupt economy. I find it horrible on every level. I'm sorry to sort of be quite blunt in saying that. And that's one of the reasons why I think what the ABC does, and I don't think the ABC is perfect, far from. If you look at, this is being recorded, isn't it? If you look at some of the treatment of what are otherwise really complex issues that get featured, say, on the ABC's news homepage, unfortunately, you'll see many of the same characteristics that I was just describing. Only a very narrow range of issues wanting to be canvassed if it involves, say, the Catholic Church or the Muslim tradition, or and then only sort of fairly narrow or narrowly cast articles. One of the reasons that the ABC Religion Ethics website is so precious to me, quite apart from the fact that I started it, I founded it, I came up with a vision for it. They wanted originally, this is going back 12 years, originally the ABC wanted a kind of one-stop page where all of the ABC's content vaguely involving religion would just kind of be dumped, and you could then go through and scroll down and sort of click on whatever it is you wanted to listen to or whatever it is you wanted to read. I told them when I was being interviewed for the job, I thought that was an awful idea. You're just reproducing more of the same, and you're not doing what I think the ABC can do uniquely and best, which is to cultivate an area of expertise, to trade on the fact that we don't have a commercial model for what it is that the ABC does, that we don't have to pander to advertisers, and we don't necessarily have to go out running after audience views. Instead, we can go for the best, not just the most popular. We can go for what really has integrity and authenticity rather than what's going to garner the most page views. So what I sort of urged them from the very beginning is we needed to have something like a specialist site where we weren't going to get experts, theologians, moral philosophers. We weren't going to ask them to reduce complex thinking to 800 words or less, but we were going to get experts to tell us, to tell me as the editor, this is what's not being discussed. This is what's being overlooked. This is what people should listen to. This is what people should be interested in. In other words, it's reversing the model. Instead of asking, what does the audience want to hear? What does the audience want to read? Instead, we're letting people who come richly and deeply from within the tradition itself to say, this is what you should be interested in. If you really want to know about Islam, this is what nourishes your soul. This is what should fire your questions. This is what's really important, not just popular. So for the better part of the last 12 years, that's the site that I've been curating, that I've been running. And there are a number of principles that govern the site. Durya, I believe, sent you out a link to a page that I wrote last year that gives the best sense that I can give about the governing moral and intellectual principles, quite apart from the ABC's own editorial policies, the kind of governing moral principles of the site. So if you don't mind, I just want to give a very, very rough sense of the governing principles of the site. And then I just want to say, if it's okay with you, a little something more about op-ed writing and about the op-ed economy. That's probably the best way that I can find to describe it. The economy of opinion writing. I'm not using economy there in a good way. I'm using it in a pejorative sense. So look, you would all know that there is no shortage of what's often called hot takes. My kids love YouTube, and one of the genre of YouTube videos that they enjoy watching are so-called reaction videos. So, a game trailer or a movie trailer gets released, and someone who knows nothing at all about the trailer or doesn't have any inside information simply reacts to what it is that they've just seen for the better part of 7 or 8 minutes. And then that's supposed to be something where the audience meets the reaction on the part of the reactor, and then, you gradually find out more and more things as you go. It seems to me that a great deal of opinion writing is precisely that. It's reaction writing. The biggest market for opinion writing at the moment among mainstream media outlets are for essentially op-eds that really are extended tweets, that are forms of emotivity, that try to gather together a sense of outrage or disbelief. In other words, what a great many op-eds tend to do, even in places like the New York Times, is they tend to plant a flag in the ground saying, this is the moral terrain on which I stand. This is how angry what I just witnessed made me. This is how furious I am about this particular piece of injustice. Who's with me? And, we can all imagine times where that kind of principled outrage calls for solidarity in the face of something that is, that anyone of good moral sense should be infuriated by. We can all think about times when that kind of call for solidarity, who's with me in believing that this particular thing should not be tolerated. But I think those moments aren't as common as Twitter leads us to believe they are. Not everything is an outrage. Not everything is supposed to make us leave our reasoning faculties to the side and simply indulge in pure emotionality. And it seems to, I'm stunned now by the number of op-eds that I read that run along these lines. I don't know what the answer is. I'm still in a state of white heat over what it is that I've just seen. But this is how I'm feeling right now. I'm sure I'm going to cool off a bit later, but I wanted to write this while my heat was at its maximum. I can think of times where that's been really good, because sometimes emotion leads us to a state of inarticulacy. We just don't know the words to say. And sometimes someone who's thought deeply about something or has particular control over their words, sometimes it's really good to hear somebody or to read somebody who kind of captures what I wanted to say. And maybe it's like offering a common prayer, where I didn't know how to pray until I heard someone else pray, and then I knew the right words to be able to use. Again, there are times where that's a very good thing, but I think those times are a lot rarer than we currently lead ourselves to believe. In other words, just constant outrage isn't necessarily a great thing. And I fear that a great many of op-eds at the moment are simply that. It's just outrage. It's just emotion, or it's languishing in a state of shared injustice. So one of the things that, and then some of the, I think, the intellectual vices that go along with that, like attacking people or using ad hominem arguments to try to demean or diminish or insult one's opponents, rather than find a way of appealing. So with some of those things in mind, I tried to draw up a kind of moral template. These are the virtues that I look for when anything gets submitted to me for publication. And one of the first of them really is civility. And by civility, I don't mean being nice. There's some times where having an edge to a piece, having a particular sharp turn of phrase, even prosecuting an argument robustly. There are many, many occasions where I think that is absolutely wonderful, and we all have resources in our theological, in our moral, in our philosophical traditions that let us do that, but do that in a way that doesn't simply demean or diminish or insult one's opponents. So for me, civility is about writing in such a way where you really are trying to persuade those who aren't already on side. If if the point of your op-ed is to plant a flag in the ground and to say, who's with me? Who's on my team? Who's in my tribe? Who's on my side? Then what you're asking people to do is to read your piece already believing what it is that you believe, already being convinced of what it is that convinces you. And that might generate views, that might generate retweets or likes, but I guess on a deeper level, what's the point of it? If it's just telling people what they already know, or if it's giving somebody an argument that they already agree with, what's the point of it? So for me, a really good op-ed is something that tries to appeal to people who aren't already on side. It tries to take them from a position, maybe not of outright antagonism, but maybe from a position of confusion or suspicion or distrust, and that leads them along gently, carefully, maybe with a degree of self-exposure, where you're letting them in on the way that you think or how you feel, but that leads them along a process where they go from a position of disbelief or distrust, and it leads them slowly to a position of, again, maybe not being completely convinced, but perhaps not being as distrustful as they were before. Now that leads me to another point that I think we can pick up a little bit later, but I just want to mention it now. One of the other problems with op-ed writing today is a lot of op-ed writing and a lot of op-ed reading tends to be categorical. It tends to be categorical, which means that if you write something as a representative, as an entire group of people. And we all know that this is one of the most established forms of racism, even for those who aren't antipathetically racist. The belief that someone can be a spokesperson for a rich, diverse, incredibly plural tradition. The idea that somebody speaks for a community, or that someone speaks for a theological tradition, rather than seeing a particular person's voice as a contribution to that, or as engaging richly with that particular tradition. So I think one of the ways that categorical writing leaves us unstuck is someone is read as being a representative of an entire tradition and therefore to be distrusted, or someone is discounted as representing an entire tradition and therefore dismissed in advance. And I think that idea that it's who you are, not what you say, that determines whether you should be read, that for me is just about the most suspicious and pervasive forms of racism that's still with us. Even if it's someone who's broadly on side, just because you represent a tradition doesn't mean that your voice is simply synonymous with that. So one of the ways I think that that civility works itself out in the kind of writing that I'm looking for is writing that doesn't simply dismiss somebody else because they belong to a particular tradition, a tradition like the right, a tradition like conservatism, a tradition like Christianity, a tradition like Islam, but rather tries to engage with that in a way that's going to be persuasive, in a way that's going to be mutually ennobling, and in a way that's going to give somebody insight into this is how the tradition works from the inside. So one of the other things that I simply don't countenance for any article that appears on the site that I edit are ad hominem arguments. The sorts of arguments that lead to those ugly little jabs, those ugly little jibes, the things that don't do anything in the course of your argument except diminish the audience's perspective on the person that you're responding to. One of the philosophers that's meant a great deal to me is Immanuel Kant. And he said that a great vice in public life is to publish things or to write things that so diminish one's perspective of another human being that it has the effect of effectively silencing them. that their standing in a community is so demeaned and diminished. They are so insulted and satirized that no words that they speak can receive a hearing. Now, I think we can all think of members of our community who suffer precisely that indignity, relentlessly, constantly. And it's one of the great cancers, it seems to me, in our public life. And I think the way that one responds to that isn't by doing it in turn. It's still a vice when I so demean or diminish another human being or another tradition so that they themselves can't get a hearing. It seems to me, and this is one of the arguments, this is one of the principles that's guided me every step of the way. Nothing is lost. Nothing is lost when everyone is ennobled. Nothing is lost when all of our capacity to be articulate is increased or enhanced. Nothing is lost when we find better words to express ourselves. Nothing is lost when the quality of debate and dialogue is increased and enhanced. In turn, everything is lost when the way that one side wins an argument is by so demeaning and diminishing and insulting the other side that they can't be given a voice. They can't have a hearing. So that's why anything that's ad hominem, anything that's needlessly divisive, I just think what's the point in it? One of our worst aspects, I think, as human beings, is already the tendency to indulge in what I have come to call categorical contempt. In other words, looking on an entire group of people with a degree of contemptuousness, with disdain, diminishing an entire group. I don't think any of us wins by doing that or by participating in that. Finally, one of the last principle that I always try to uphold whenever I judge any op-ed that's been submitted to me is the principle of neighbor love. I know this seems very, very strange as an editorial principle, but it's the highest of all of them for me. Neighbor love. One of the ways I think that we love our neighbors, or that we love those that are unlike us, is by framing our arguments in such a way that it stands a decent chance of persuading them, of being heard by them in the position or in the state, in the intellectual tradition where they are. John Rawls, the great political philosopher, called this the rule of public reason. Don't mount an argument in a way that somebody else can't hear it or can't understand it. I prefer neighbor love. One of the ways that we love others is by speaking, by arguing, by expressing ourselves in such a way that they might be able to be persuaded by it. It's actually one of the ways that we nurture one another, one of the ways that we respect one another, one of the ways that we care for one another, arguing in such a way that they might be able to understand it. That doesn't mean, however, so diluting your tradition or so abandoning theological or moral concepts that there's nothing that distinguishes writers from a Muslim tradition or from a Christian tradition or from a different philosophical school. It seems to me that one of the great things about many of the pieces that I've published, especially from, someone who I've come to love very, very dearly and admire tremendously, is the great theologian Khaled Abou el-Fadl from UCLA. He's been one of my writers from the very beginning. I presented to him much of what I'm presenting to you, and he's been a regular and a robust writer for the better part of 9 years. There is nothing about what he writes for me that diminishes or demeans or suppresses or mutes the moral contribution of the Islamic tradition to our common life. He harnesses it and brings it to bear on a non-Muslim audience. And it seems to me that the way that he does that, in that full-throated way, without apology, without embarrassment, but to show that this is a moral tradition that everybody profits from, that everybody gains from, It seems to me that he's been one of the very, very, very best of all the contributors to the site in doing precisely that. So loving one's neighbor doesn't mean using a particular form of language that's going to be vaguely understandable even to the most militant of secularists. It means putting forward your argument in such a way that it's clear that your argument is for the benefit of all. Let me just say one final thing then about the logic of the news cycle. Online news today is trapped in a condition of, how can I phrase it? Of moral amnesia, let's put it that way. So something might explode, a big story might emerge, and then everything about that particular website or news site or mainstream outlet is going to be captivated with that particular story. The news editors will be getting their content right. The opinion editors will be sending out desperate invitations to people who can have something to say about that to create quote unquote additional content, which is just fodder for, for social media. And then once the story has moved on, once the catastrophe has abated, then interest has also passed. I've never allowed the ABC's Religion and Ethics website to be a slave to the moral amnesia of mainstream media. In other words, we are never a slave to the news cycle. What that means is I want my contributors to tell me what they think are the issues that should be achieving or attracting attention. I rely on my contributors to tell me nobody is discussing this. It might be an aspect of this particular story. It might be a part of the deep historical, theological, or philosophical background that isn't being discussed. It may be nothing to do at all with what it is that's preoccupying mainstream media outlets. You are experts, or you are training to be experts. You are giving obscene amounts of time to study and to nourish yourselves richly in a particular tradition. Don't think for a moment that you only have a voice or you only have something to say if you have some contribution to make to the current news cycle. Some of the best op-eds I've ever published have been those that have elicited these responses from an audience. I had no idea I was even interested in this topic until I read about it. And then I realized how diminished, how inattentive my life was before reading about it. That, it seems to me, is just about the best kind of op-ed. The kind of op-ed that tells you something important about what you didn't even know about. The other kind of op-ed that I think is invaluable, pardon me for getting all philosophical during the lunchtime break. The philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein had a little visual trick that he wrote a lot about and taught a lot about. It's what's called the joint image of the duck rabbit. I don't know if any of you have heard of it. So it's just a simple child's drawing. Looked at this way, it looks like a rabbit lying on its back. Looked at a slightly different way, it looks like a duck with its beak out. The beak looks kind of like rabbit ears. The rabbit ears look vaguely like a duck's beak. The fascinating thing about it is that some people only see a duck. Some people only see a rabbit, and you can't see a duck and a rabbit at the same time. It's like your vision shifts and changes between them, but you can't see both images in your own minds at once. Some of my favorite op-eds have been the kind of op-eds that do something like that with a debate. or with something that a lot of people are concerned about or discussing online. It's what's called sometimes a gestalt switch, where you looked at one thing through a particular set of eyes, and then you read something or you heard something which changed the picture completely. And now you can't see things the way that you did before. It seems to me that the best kind of op-ed doesn't just give people what they want, but it changes the way that they see the entire picture. It has the effect of changing the perspective, and then suddenly you can't see it the same way, the way that you did before. That takes a lot of care. That takes great expertise. It takes a lot of subtlety with your language, and it takes a great deal of maturity of soul to be able to take something and to flip it on its head and to tell an audience, you've been looking at this wrong. You're not seeing it through the right moral vision. You need to have your parameters expanded. You need different light. And it seems to me that if there's one great virtue that an opinion piece can give, that a news story never can, it's enacting that shift of light, that change of perspective. Earlier this year in February, Waleed and I did an episode of The Minefield with the New York Times opinion columnist Ross Douthat on opinion writing. And we devoted a considerable portion of that particular episode to changes of perspective, to this kind of gestalt switch and how that happens in op-ed articles. If any of you are interested in this, I don't want to take up too much more time in saying this, but if any of you are interested, that it seems to me is a great place to kind of go think about it a bit more deeply. And I think that's also just a nice way for people who want to write intelligent, civil, perceptive opinion pieces, not just to give the media what it wants, but to try to intervene in a way that changes the way that people think about the debate in the first place. Instead of just giving fodder or giving content, it's a nice way of saying, this is light that you desperately need to enlighten, to illuminate dark corners of a debate that we simply haven't conducted properly. So it seems to me that enacting that kind of gestalt switch, looking at something one way and then seeing it completely different, that's a great moral contribution that only very particular religious and moral traditions, I think, are able to do. So those are some of the guiding principles. I think those are good principles for writing in public more generally. These are absolutely the kind of principles that govern the ABC's Religion and Ethics website as long as I'm there, and nobody else wants to do the job that I do. So as far as I can tell, I'm going to be there for a while. I'll also just say very briefly, just because I'm sure someone's going to ask about words, I publish things of all lengths. Perhaps, one of the most popular pieces I've ever published was a 600-word open letter from a young Muslim girl in Sydney. She wrote an open letter to New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern after observing her response to the Christchurch massacre. It was written like a 14-year-old girl, but I worked with her for 5, 6, 7 days. I worked with her and her parents, and we ended up producing what I thought was a beautiful letter that went straight to the desk of the Prime Minister and received a response from the Prime Minister. That was wonderful for me. That was a nice, clean, elegant 600 words. I've more recently published pieces bordering on 12,000 words. For me, I'm not a great fan of those because they take a long time to edit, as you can imagine. But the thing for me is, does the argument need that many words? There are some arguments that 800 words are a monstrosity. 800 words are insulting the topic. There are other topics where 2,000 words are flabby. You just don't need that many. You can say things much more crisply, much more succinctly. So for me, what comes first is the argument. And then the number of words that you need to make that argument are always a distant second. So I hope that helps. I'm sure when some of you begin raising your hands, you'll let me know if it doesn't help, but I'm really happy to try to clarify or to try to answer any more pressing questions that you have.
Thank you very much. I think Jessica has a question. I think the joy of listening to an editor. You were just drawing pictures and telling us, showing us, not telling, but showing us, picturing. And it makes sense. Every single word, every single picture really captures an entire story in one picture. I think that is really not very informative, but also joyful to listen to you.
Oh, thank you. Can I just mention just very quickly, and then I promise I'll shut up. I talk too much at the best of times. Many of you might find this odd. I love publishing sermons or homilies or reflections on texts, on religious texts. Obviously, there's a danger sometimes that it can seem too in-house or too obscure. But it seems to me that you never understand the way a community works until you hear them talk about what they love most, what is most precious to them. And most sermons, most homilies are love letters. They are expressions of deep affection, of tremendous value. They are messages of the heart of what is most important in all of our lives. So I've loved publishing sermons and homilies, and they're invariably very, very widely read. It's almost like an anthropologist comes upon a tribe and has been able to come into a secret meeting, and they suddenly hear what these people really sound like. And when you hear what they really sound like, you discover, oh my God, there's a nobility here. There's an intelligence here. There's a sophistication here that we simply didn't know from the outside. So I just wanted to mention that I frequently publish sermons, and it's for precisely that reason, not just for the moral value of conveying important messages to those who don't necessarily belong to that community, but also as a way of, you can never understand someone until you know what they love. And this is a great way, I think, of understanding what people love.
Thank you very much. I think it is very important for us to see that there is an outlet which can really, listen to us and consider, our pieces of writing without having all these media, economics in mind. Thank you for that. And I think Jessica has a question. She typed her question. Would you like to ask your question, Jessica? It is, yes, you're still here. Maybe you can ask yourself.
Yes, I'm here. Thanks very much. I'm just in the class and students are starting to arrive, so I'm going to mute myself again in a moment. But Scott, I was just really interested in what you were saying there about how we adapt our argument to enable our audience to understand. What about in the case where the audience is not willing to understand, whether there may be obvious or unconscious bias at play? What would be an approach that you can recommend if the idea and the object is to enlighten, take them from that Gestalt idea that you were sharing? What is the shift that we need to make in ourselves when we can tell that the audience is just, I don't want to hear about this, and Muslims are this, or they're like that, and I am not prepared to take on board the enlightenment that you're trying to share with me? How would you work with that in terms of the argument to enable your audience to understand?
Yeah, look, that's a wonderful question. I'd give a three-part answer. I'll try to keep it really, really brief. Look, one of the first things that unfortunately you all are going to have to reckon with is that most of your use to the mainstream media is going to be giving the media what they already want, or what they think that they want, which is to say giving an audience what they think they want, which is usually going to be something, and you've heard all of this, I don't need to, not all Muslims are extremists. Islam isn't inherently misogynist. Don't paint us all with the same brushes. You know this. So there's that people want to hear. And that's not going to convince anybody who already isn't convinced. And again, you've had firsthand experience of this. The other thing that the media most often wants is to reduce rich religious traditions to a kind of lifestyle choice. I don't know if I'm supposed to be tickled or if I'm supposed to be offended that most of the Muslim or pro-Muslim content that's appearing on mainstream media sites begins to appear around Ramadan and is usually something along the lines of, we've always known that fasting is good for us. This is an approach to health and well-being and mindfulness and self-care that's good for you. These are convenient ways of breaking fasts. Here are some nice Ramadan recipes for you. Look, I mean, I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that, but it's taking something that makes a moral claim on the lives of all human beings and reduces it to a matter of, here's a nice little bit of, health guidance or a nice little bit of trivia or culinary art. So that's what the media wants. And so often, I think, especially members of traditions that have been backed into an apologetic corner, that feel that they can only take a step out into public by first saying, please don't think that I'm one of them. Please don't think this about me. Again, I find that a horrible state to back any human being into, that you first have to apologize, you first have to disclaim something, that you first have to say what you're not before you're given a hearing. So let me just acknowledge from the outset, I think that is an awful position to be put in. And both of those, I think, are entrenching the hostility or the suspicion that many members of the audience feel. One of the great forms that I found to enact that Gestalt switch that I was talking about before, which I think really is a matter of confounding the distrust that a lot of people have from the outset, before you even start speaking. One of the great ways, I think, is by addressing something that the audience maybe doesn't expect you to address. I know this sounds very, very strange, but don't take your talking points from what the mainstream media says are the only things that you should be talking about. The Islamic tradition, like any great theological or great moral philosophical tradition, makes a claim on human life. It makes a claim on the words that we speak in private and the words that we speak in public, on the way that we honor one another when nobody's looking, the way that we honor one another when everybody's looking. It has something to say about politics. It has something to say about bioethics. It has something to say about food ethics. It has something to say about immigration policy. It seems to me that one of the great ways of confounding that distrust in advance is by writing something about a topic that nobody would expect you to be addressing. And then what you do is you bring light in from an angle that nobody saw coming. This is the foundation. This is the moral basis upon which I'm saying what it is that I'm saying. And then suddenly everything begins taking on a slightly different light and an argument that maybe I was thinking, wow, this is really good. And then suddenly you discover as a reader, but this argument is predicated on a moral or theological basis that I didn't think I believed in. And then suddenly you're led from the argument to the moral basis, and then that begins making you question. I thought I was a straight up and down utilitarian or secularist. And dear God, suddenly I discover that what I believe and value most has this much in common with the tradition that I thought was inherently misogynist or chauvinist or whatever else. So in other words, what I'm trying to say, Jessica, and this is a really horrible long way of saying it, surprise them. Surprise them. I mean, surprise is one of the great coups of any moral argumentation. There are wonderful forms of either satire or of parable or of commenting on a novel or working with a poem that can take you into territory that is politically, morally, socially, anthropologically relevant, but leading an audience from a place that they weren't expecting to a conclusion that they weren't expecting, and then realizing that along the way, you've actually nourished and enlightened their souls in the process. That, it seems to me, I mean, that takes work. You can't whack that out on the keyboard one night before a deadline. It takes work. But an article like that is worth 100,000 op-eds that give people what they already thought they knew. Does that kind of, okay.
Thank you very much. And Salman, you have a question? Ask yourself. You type your question, or do you want me to ask? It was about pitching.
Yes.
Yes, Salman.
Yeah. So the only question I had was, I was wondering on the submit page. I was wondering, as far as words and structure, is there any guidance that we can get regarding the pitch?
Oh, look, in terms of the pitch itself,
yeah.
I'm sorry to be blunt about this. The briefer, the better. So all of the emails that go from that submit page end up in my inbox. What helps me is having a clear sense of, this is the topic that I want to discuss. It really can only be a sentence or two. That's fine with me. That'll give me a very, very clear sense of whether or not it intrigues me enough that I want to go ahead and say, yes, go ahead. I would also ordinarily love to see just a little something about, how can I say this? Someone standing in an academic community, in a religious community, is very, very important. Why should anybody hear what I think about this? And especially if you're writing something that maybe people weren't expecting, or you want to address a topic in a way that people didn't necessarily see coming. I would love to have some indication. I'm not saying that who you are justifies what it is you write, or that you can't say something unless you're a particular kind of person. But the standing that you might have in order to be able to make this argument can go a long way towards that argument and ending up being persuasive. So really, one sentence or two about what it is you want to write about, and a sentence, this is why I think I'm in a good position to persuade people.
Yep.
What I'll always then do is I respond to every submit email. You'll always hear something from me. If I think that it's a goer, I'll let you know, and I'll just say go for it. If I'm not sure, I'll let you know that too. If I want to know a few more details about you, I'll let you know that as well.
Yep, that sounds good. Thank you.
That's right.
Yes, any more questions for Scott? Should we say that ABC Religions and Ethics is a unique outlet, and maybe the only outlet I can see at this stage for us to really, start digging in from the history, civilization, and bring and discuss maybe?
Look, it is, and it's unfortunate. When I was, I'll just say this very briefly because I can see that Emre has a question. But I was hired by a remarkable gentleman who's no longer with us, because he was worried about what he described as the collapse of specialization in mainstream media, and especially among public broadcasters. The BBC, for instance, is a shell of its former self. The sort of things you get on the BBC's religion and ethics page is the kind of thing you would get from, I mean, really anywhere and nowhere. It's just terrible. So there were a number of us who were hired at the same time because this man wanted to create what he called a college of specialists. A college of specialists. All of those other editors are no longer with the ABC, and religion ethics is still with us, and we still manage to get huge readers every month because, like you say, Daria, internationally, domestically, and we have a huge international audience. There's just nothing quite like this that doesn't dictate to contributors, this is what I want you to write before you write it.
Yes, I think Emre has a question after that, Ahlam and Lena.
Yes, thank you for your presentation. Very much enjoyed it. Thank you, Daria, and everyone else as well. I was introduced to op-eds by Ariana Huffington, actually. She invited me to write. So when I think Huffington Post was a little bit more reputable. Yeah. And then I had pieces in Fox News and then Democracy Journal. I wrote about Muslims, Turkey, and various other things. And I've been invited to write, which is nice to get invitations to write in for think tank journals and things like that. I mean, op-ed pieces, not long-winding things. I barely have time to write op-eds, let alone something that's longer. How should we choose where we're writing? Is there a benchmark as opposed to I mean, in terms of audience, in terms of the left-right divide regarding that? I've written from, again, Huffington Post is one example, Fox News is another, and then kind of a niche Democracy Journal. But there's a myriad of opportunities. What type of baseline should we be focusing on when we're looking for something outside of an invitation, maybe something that's more niche, more broad, more specific to our particular field or whatever? Any recommendations regarding that?
Yeah, look, I've got so much to say about this that I'll have to be very, 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 very brief. This is a real issue, I think, because a great many online sites, online outfits, even when they try to be a bit more even-handed in terms of their, say, left-right base of contributors, you often find that the left-right are almost cardboard cutouts of left and right. In other words, it's kind of representative figures of what people who know very, very little about the left or right would expect from the left and the right. I think one of the real problems, just speaking in this context for a moment, and then what I know about the US context, one of the problems, I think, that a great many Muslim writers have been backed into, certainly in Australia, because of the unrelenting hostility that a great many Muslims have encountered in public debate and from the hands of say, right-wing sites or more conservative contributors or more conservative kind of, op-ed mercenaries for hire. A lot of Muslims, it seems to me, have felt as though the only place that they can find a degree of hospitality is among more left-wing or progressive sites and outlets. And the way then that I'm trying to be as generous as I can in saying this, the way then that they try to find a home in those sites or find a place or find a voice is ultimately by echoing or parroting much of the same left-wing or progressive discourse, which may, or in very, very, very many cases may not resonate with the language, the moral concepts of the Islamic tradition. And I think some of the compromise then that's been made is many of us are happy to talk like progressives, and many progressives are happy to have our voice among them because, well, ultimately, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. That's a terrible compromise to make. No form of moral argumentation, no religious or moral tradition worth its salt should be prepared to say, I'm happy to make this kind of semi-unprincipled accommodation with this particular political orientation because it's the only place where I can find a voice. And what it ends up doing then, I think, is that it also reduces the richness of the Islamic moral tradition and makes it almost like a footnote or a little bit of exotic coloring on the edges of progressive discourse more generally. And then progressive discourse is really happy because it boosts progressives' diversity, impression of diversity of view. No, look, I'm being purposely kind of blunt here. I'm not actually saying conservative is better, progressive is worse, conservative is worse, progressive is better. I'm not saying that. But I think there's something about any moral tradition or any religious tradition that has the kind of richness, the history of debate, the sophistication of ideas, and again, like I said before, the moral claim that expects all human beings to sit up and take notice. There needs to be something about that that cuts diagonally across the left-right divide, that refuses to be co-opted by either, that refuses to be defined by both. But it says that ultimately the left needs to be evaluated by the way that it accords to these moral principles, as does the right. On some of these occasions, this is going to sound more progressive. On other occasions, it's going to sound more conservative. But so does every moral tradition that's serious. So that's just a very, very long way of saying in the US marketplace, in the US media market, I mean, there really is that left wing, right wing, if we want your opinion, we'll give it to you approach to its contributing writers. My recommendation would be you might get a whole lot of views for something that you write, for a piece that's solidly progressive or solidly conservative, but the piece disappears in an instant. I mean, it really does disappear quickly because you're giving people what they already know. It seems to me that it is incumbent upon people who believe in public debate to try to seek out those sites. And I'm not just saying religion and ethics. I'm saying good magazines, those wonderful magazines that stand between journals on the one, it's like peer-reviewed journals on the one hand and trashy 800 words or less op-ed sites on the other. Seek out those places where a more lasting argument that confounds the left-right divide, that tries to cut diagonally across audience expectations. Seek out those kinds of places. And they still are there. I mean, they still are there. This is where I think cultivating good relationships with good editors is a very, very, very important thing to do.
And can I just quickly add a part 3 to that? When is it ideal to write for your own blog? Are there circumstances where you push away and write for yourself, maybe consistently and without having to shop for opportunities outside?
Yeah, look, that's a wonderful question. I'm suspicious. I mean, what you're talking about is public diarizing or public diary writing. Look, I think one of the, sorry, I know that that's not necessarily what blogs are, but let me just try to put it this way. One of the things that's gone terribly wrong in our free speech debate is that we think that what free speech is I've got this thing inside me that I want to express. And by God, I should be given the right to express myself. We all know, anybody who's been in any morally serious relationship knows, you don't just say what you think. You don't just take what's inside and let it blurt out. I think for many of us, our marriages would have been over very, very quickly if that's the way that we conducted ourselves. Friendships would be left in rubbles if we simply took what's inside and just blurted it out. Instead, when we speak, we often try to experiment with words. You've all had these situations, haven't you, where I'm not completely sure what it is that I'm trying to say. I think, pardon me if this doesn't come out quite right, but then you try out a sequence of words. And then you need somebody who you trust to come back to you and to say, but are you hearing the way that that might sound to someone like this? Do you hear the other resonances that particular form of words picks up? So I think we need different spheres of writing. I think we need to find ways of trying out forms of language that help us get our minds and our hearts around things we're really struggling with. I think a very, very personal journal. I think writing emails or text messages to oneself, a kind of first draft approach to writing. I think that's incredibly valuable. Unfortunately, too many people now take Twitter as their first draft of what it is they're trying to say. And they put it out there, and then they realize instantly, oh my God, that's not what I meant when I said that. And then it hangs around their neck like some great moral albatross for the rest of their public careers. So I think we need this kind of, this concentric circle approach to writing. There are things that just need to be very, very private, where I experiment with words, phrases, particular ways of framing things. Maybe a blog might be a good way for doing a first draft of an article, a more considered article that I want to do later, something that captures a degree of that heat, that uncertainty, that moral outrage. But then there's a big gap between the first and the second, just as there's a big gap between the second and a properly considered article that I can put my name on and be proud of it in 2 months' time.
Sorry, I think Daddy is frozen. She just asked me to ask Ahlam, please, can you ask your question?
Yes, hi, thank you for the talk, Scott. And I was wondering when you get pieces that in which Muslims try to portray a certain image about Islam or the culture that to some degree secularized, this narrative that we belong in a way that is, the identity as Muslim is not visible enough, if you know what I mean. As you said, as you mentioned, when you talk about Ramadan, they tend to talk about how, the health benefits and how this has been going all along, and how Islam is not the only religion that practices, fasting, but they don't highlight the Islamic or the Muslim perspective or aspect in it. I was wondering, how do you deal with such, with these specific, writings, or how do you direct them or redirect them in a way?
Yeah, look, that's a wonderful question. Thank you for it. Let me try to answer without being too blunt. There are forms of racism or prejudice that can take a virulent form and a patronizing or benign form. So we all know what virulent forms of racism look like and feel like, where there is something utterly wrong with an entire category, an entire group of people by virtue of them belonging to that particular category or group of people. But I think one of the more benign forms of racism or prejudice is in the form of, well, that's kind of a cute or quaint little bit of exoticism on top of something that we all sort of otherwise are vaguely well disposed to. So, you know, this would be Islam as a lifestyle choice. This would be a little bit of multicultural sprinkling on the top of otherwise secular practices, as if the claim that these traditions make don't go all the way down into who we are, as if, say, the fast during Ramadan isn't a tremendous focusing of one's soul's energy on what matters most within our individual and common lives. Mm-hmm. So I often receive what I think I can only describe as PR pieces. Yes. Pieces that are aimed as almost public relations, which really are, don't think badly about us, we're not weird. Sometimes, believe it or not, it actually really, really depends. I mean, it really, really does depend, because I think some of those pieces, especially when I find that they're written by very young writers, oftentimes school students or early university students, and these are forms of self-expression where they really are trying to find a voice and trying to say, don't like me just because of what I look like. So sometimes that can be very, very, very valuable, especially for a younger audience.
Yes.
I think when that gets up into the dimension of, say, professional writers or doctoral students or people who really are trying to find a consistent voice in public, I think in the end, these kind of please like me pieces can be really counterproductive because they contribute to this sense of the shallowness of a tradition, rather than the idea that the tradition goes all the way down, that it makes a claim on who we are. So what I usually try to do, I try to gain something like a sense of what the motive is behind the request or behind the pitch. If it's self-promotional, I tend to say, look, thank you. I can think of a lot of other sites that I believe your piece would work really well. It's just not for us. Mm-hmm. If I think there's something else here, then I really, really will urge the writer to maybe take this, to use language that is more distinctively, that is more authentically Muslim, or that tries to give a real sense of who I am deeply, rather than what I might just seem to be on the surface. For me, this is what op-ed pieces are supposed to do. They're supposed to turn people's hearts towards one another. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a strange way of saying it, I know, but a really good opinion piece ought to turn the hearts of people towards one another in mutual understanding. I might not agree with you, but I can see that there is a depth of moral energy here that demands that I take the person making it seriously. That's usually the kind of thing that I would probably try to encourage instead. Does that help you at all?
Yeah, and I think a big part of why people do go take that direction is because the other side or the other kind of prevalent discourse within the Muslim sometimes writers is the idea that the idea is that Islam is all about do's and don'ts, in a way. So they try to say, oh, we don't have that, instead of trying to give it some more nuance, or take the stand and talk about the issues that are controversial in a deeper sense, as you say, and explain the history and explain why this is relevant or not relevant and how it's being used, and instead of going through all that trouble, they tend to just take the easy way out and just try to hide behind the whole idea of belonging and we're all humans and this is just a private matter and you don't have to worry about my Islamic background. I'm just like you. I enjoy the same things and I do the same things as you do. Yeah. So yeah, it makes sense, right?
Look, that's a wonderful other point. And let me just say very briefly, the particular tradition of moral philosophy that has nourished me for decades is very suspicious of forms of what we might call moral judgment. A lot of people, the way that they use the word moral or the way they use the word ethical or unethical, it means that this is a weapon that you use to say who's right, who's wrong, who I'm prepared to associate with, who I insist on sort of excluding. What morality or moral language does is it tries to ascertain whether someone is living fully and richly into the common inheritance of beauty and of words and of relationships that have been given to human beings. And if someone isn't living richly, if their words are shallow and flabby and trite, if their lives are undisciplined and incontinent and thoughtless in the way that they conduct themselves, then what moral judgment? It's not that moral judgment then says this is right and this is wrong. Instead, what the language of morality tries to do is it traces paths for people to find one another once again.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderfully exploratory about moral language, where you try to find the right words that are going to resonate with somebody to help them see you two don't have to be enemies after all. You can actually find points of commonality and connection where you can discover the great grace, the great gift that this other person is in our common life. So I think what you're describing there is beautiful, and it's one of the ways that I think we can kind of leave behind so much of the judgmentalism, simple condemnation that seems to go an awful lot with public debate today.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
No, pleasure.
Thank you, Ahlam. Thank you, Scott. We'll take quickly a question from Lena.
Hi. First of all, thank you, Scott, so much for that. As a young op-ed writer myself and just kind of emerging into that media field, it was really interesting, especially your stuff about, the being an intersection between the right and the left, which I think is very difficult, especially in university spaces, because there's very much this strong linkage that people want to build between, either we're right or we're left, but there's no kind of in between that there needs to be developed. I think my question is more of a simple one, and more so, I think, to do with my own learning. But I was wondering, you talked about civility and you talked about, loving your neighbor. And I was wondering, and you also talked about, that you don't shy away from a robust argument or an argument that, tackles another perhaps not so great argument and, debunks myths. But I was wondering, what is that fine line between civility and going into lack of civility? Because I think it's very confusing sometimes, and I think I find that confusing as well, because sometimes you read pieces and you see that, okay, they're being civil, but sometimes they're not able to get their point across, but then they're uncivil and they're able to get their point across. And I just wonder, how do you navigate that? How do you go about navigating that? Wonderfully
put. Thank you so much for the question. And actually, believe it or not, I have a very simple answer. It all begins with refusing. Sorry, if I'm looking down from my camera, it's because I'm looking at your little sort of spot on the thing. It begins by refusing to assign motives to the person you're disagreeing with. That for me is the dividing line. Just think about it. The number of times that I've received articles or that I've read articles where somebody has said, they're arguing this on the surface. This might seem reasonable, but let me tell you what's behind it. This is what they really want. This is what they really believe. For me, the baseline of civility is this. All that I can do as a matter of moral commitment and in a commitment to public debate, all I can do is to receive your words as they've been spoken, to receive your words as they've been written. That's all I can engage with. You might have ulterior motives. You might have some agenda or some particular program. You might have some background or some secret nefarious association. But that's not what I'm arguing with. You know, Lena, the number of responses that I've received to articles that I've published where somebody has had no interest in engaging with the article that was published, but instead wants to try to take on what they perceive as the reality behind the words that were spoken. That is not just morally dubious. That's saying, I have better access to who you really are, to what's really going on in your mind and heart than you do. That's also a form of morally diminishing, it seems to me, another person. The great benefit, however, of engaging with somebody's words as they've been spoken and the audience and the argument as it's been presented is that as you engage with it, as you do the person you're responding to the honor, the respect of engaging with their words as written or as spoken, is you end up discovering points of commonality, points of kind of intersection between your world and theirs that lead to greater understanding or that help you actually refine the terms of the argument even further. I think one of the big problems with so much public debate, especially as it's conducted in a show like Q&A or on Twitter, is that every argument is a zero-sum game. You clash swords on this particular point and it's double or nothing. You either win everything or you lose everything. And so you need to try to make this particular argument as cutting, as incisive, as demeaning, as victorious as it can be. But in doing that, we corrupt the conditions in which that argument can keep going. You know, the worst forms of argument aren't arguments that keep going. The worst forms of argument are the arguments where the two people aren't speaking the same language. They just don't understand one another. And when we get into motives, what's really behind what it is that they're saying, the real agenda behind the whole thing, that, it seems to me, is a form of argument where we're just talking different languages. What's wrong with you is who you are and what you believe, rather than what you say. As a matter of editorial policy, the ABC does not do, this is why the person wrote what they wrote. This is the motives behind what it is that they wrote. As a matter of editorial policy, we do not do that. I've then taken that to a very, very, very high standard. I won't allow anything like the attribution of real motives or real agenda. It seems to me that once you do that, civility is done. So that would be my first or my only really advice. If you really want to engage with somebody or with an argument, you've got to engage with the words as they've been spoken, with the words as they've been said. And as you do that, so let me say one final thing. One of the bizarre things in my job, you know, you're all sort of academics or academically engaged. You know, you read somebody's work and you think, you know, I'm pretty sure I would die in a ditch opposing everything that this person stands for. I hate this person's approach to life. I hate their take on politics. If I spent the rest of my life debunking everything this person wrote, that would be a life well spent. And then in a position like mine, because I'm an academic as well, you end up sitting in the same studio as them or on the same stage as them. And you hear them making the arguments that you've read in print, and then suddenly you see the moral energy behind it and the emotion and the care, the seriousness with which they frame their argument. And you know what? It ends up being really, really hard hating somebody when you're watching them and hearing them when there's that point of kind of personal connection. And I guess my advice, I'm not saying I agree with them, but you feel much deeper sympathy for them as moral agents than maybe you did when it's just on either side of a particular text. So my advice would be, don't attribute motives. Don't try to go behind. Simply engage with the words, the human articulation as expressed. If you engage that way, you're going to be shocked how many points of connection, how many possibilities for sympathy and mutual understanding end up emerging. Does that kind of help?
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. And I think I just want to state that your approach to writing and I guess putting out pieces, that have opinions in them is actually very Islamically true as well, because even when in Islam, when we are discussing or when we're, arguing different topics or different sides of a topic, the idea is not to make the other person your enemy. You're supposed to, really love love thy neighbor kind of attitude, and that respect. And I think it's very interesting that you point out that concept of agenda and motives, because, as a politics student, I'm an English and politics student. So one side of my degree, asserts that everything has an agenda, everything has a motive. You can't live outside of a world that doesn't have an agenda and a motive. So I think it's very profound that you broke it down in those terms, and that really made a lot of sense to me. So thank you so much.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.